The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with conversation as representatives from dozens of species gathered for the annual defense review. Ambassador Park Ji-woo stood quietly at the human station, reviewing her notes one final time. Today, Earth would present its contribution to the Galactic Defense Initiative. She knew what was coming. The Vrexian War Marshal Quetzar called the session to order. His scales gleamed under the chamber lights as he gestured toward the display screens. "We begin with humanity's fleet inspection," he announced, and several species in the audience chittered with what sounded like amusement. Park activated the transmission from Earth's orbital anchorage. The screens filled with images of massive warships floating in perfect formation around Earth and Mars. Hundreds of vessels, each one enormous and battle-scarred, their hulls painted in faded Earth Defense Force colors. "These are our dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and carriers," Park explained calmly. "They were built 200 years ago, during our Third Solar War. We have maintained them in full operational condition since the war ended." Quetzar leaned forward, his eyes scanning the technical readouts. Then he began to laugh. It started as a low rumble, but grew louder. Soon, other council members joined in. "Fusion drives," Quetzar said between laughs. "You still use fusion drives?" "We abandoned those 3 centuries ago." An avian consensus representative spread her wings in a gesture of disbelief. "These specifications show kinetic weapons, railguns, and missile systems. How charmingly primitive." A crystalline collective delegate chimed in, its voice resonating through its mineral structure. "Our analysis indicates these vessels use physical armor plating instead of energy shields. They are museum pieces, not warships." Park kept her expression neutral as the mockery continued. She had expected this. The galaxy's modern fleets used quantum drives, graviton disruptors, and plasma weapons. They fought with technology that bent physics itself. Compared to that, human ships looked ancient. On the Times' indomitable Will Asterisk, one of Earth's oldest dreadnoughts, Captain Lee Min-seo watched the council feed with her bridge crew. The laughter from the alien species echoed through the command center. "They think we're a joke," Lieutenant Kim Tae-yang muttered from the tactical station. Min-seo studied her ship's specifications on her personal screen. The Times, indomitable Will Times, was 203 years old. She had been built in the Mars orbital yards during the darkest days of the Civil War, when humanity had split into 3 factions and turned Earth's industrial might toward mutual destruction. The Third Solar War had lasted 12 years and killed 2 billion people. Every ship in the fleet carried those scars. They were designed by people who knew what total war meant. Every system had backups, and those backups had backups. The armor was 3 meters thick, because human weapons could punch through anything thinner. The weapons themselves were brutal and simple, because complex systems failed when battles lasted for weeks. "Let them laugh," Min-seo said quietly. "These ships were built to fight enemies, with the same technology, the same intelligence, and the same determination to win. They were built to survive when nobody was coming to help." Back in the council chamber, Quetzar had composed himself enough to continue. "Ambassador Park, with respect, these vessels are inadequate for modern warfare. The Vrexian Empire's fleet uses quantum-entangled targeting systems that can track and destroy threats across light seconds. Our plasma lances can cut through any physical armor. Your ships would be destroyed in minutes against current threats." Park nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are correct, War Marshal. The Council requires that all member species contribute meaningful defensive capabilities," Quetzar continued. "We cannot accept symbolic gestures. I propose that humanity either modernize its fleet to current standards or withdraw from mutual defense obligations." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Park glanced at the datapad in her hand, then looked up at the assembled representatives. "The Council gives Earth 6 standard months to comply," Quetzar declared. "Either present a modern fleet or formally withdraw your defense commitment." Park stood silently for a moment. Through the chamber windows, she could see the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, threats existed that the galaxy had not yet encountered. Somewhere out there, something was waiting. Earth acknowledges the Council's deadline, she said finally. We will demonstrate our fleet's capability when circumstances require it. Quetzar's expression showed satisfaction, mixed with pity. We understand this is difficult for your species to accept. The galaxy has moved beyond primitive warfare. Perhaps it is time humanity focused on its other strengths. The avian representative added, We mean no disrespect. Your species has contributed much to galactic culture and science. But warfare requires cutting-edge technology, and your ships belong in a museum. Park gathered her materials and prepared to leave. As she walked toward the exit, she heard the conversations beginning around her. The species were already discussing how to fill the gap that humanity's withdrawal would create. They were already forgetting about Earth's ancient Warfleet. She paused at the doorway and looked back at the display screens, still showing Earth's orbital anchorage. Hundreds of massive ships floated there, their weapons silent, their reactors in standby mode. They looked old and worn. They looked obsolete. But Park remembered the history lessons every Earth child learned. She remembered the stories of the Third Solar War, when these ships had fought battles that lasted for months in the cold dark between planets. She remembered that humanity had built these vessels to face enemies who knew every human tactic and weakness. 6 months, she whispered to herself, then left the chamber. On the Times' indomitable will *, Captain Lee Min-seo gave orders to maintain readiness protocols. Her crew went about their duties with quiet professionalism. They had heard the mockery. They had seen the contempt, but they knew something the galaxy did not. These old ships were not kept operational out of sentiment or tradition. They were kept ready because humanity understood a truth that peaceful species often forgot. War did not care about elegance. It cared about what worked. And these ships worked. 4 months had passed since the Council's ultimatum when the first warnings appeared on long-range sensors throughout the galaxy. Scientists initially dismissed the readings as equipment malfunctions. The signatures made no sense. Then, the outer colonies went dark. The first attack hit a mining station in the outer rim. 3,000 workers simply vanished. When ships arrived to investigate, they found nothing but empty space where the station had orbited. No debris, no bodies, nothing. Within days, 12 more colonies disappeared. The pattern became clear. Something was consuming everything in its path, breaking down matter at the molecular level and leaving only void behind. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Scientists presented their findings with voices that trembled. They had found the enemy. The Kazakhs. A machine swarm that had consumed 2 entire galaxies before entering dormancy 3 million years ago. Deep space probes had accidentally disturbed their hibernation. Now, they were awake and hungry. War Marshal Quetzar immediately mobilized the Vrexian fleet. 3,000 warships, each one a masterpiece of modern technology, jumped to intercept the swarm at the colony of Vex Prime. The Vrexians were the galaxy's premier military power. If anyone could stop this threat, it would be them. The battle began at dawn on Vex Prime. The Kazakhs appeared as a cloud of millions of small drones, each one autonomous and deadly. They moved with terrible purpose, consuming everything in their path. Quetzar gave the order to engage. Quantum torpedoes streaked through space, detonating among the drone swarms. Plasma lances carved burning paths through their formations. Graviton disruptors twisted space itself, crushing thousands of drones at once. For 3 hours, the Vrexian fleet dominated. Quetzar watched his tactical displays with satisfaction as the drone count dropped. His weapons were working. His ships were winning. Then the Kazakhs adapted. The first sign was subtle. A few drones began dodging quantum torpedoes with impossible precision. Then more. Within minutes, the torpedoes were missing entirely. The drones had learned to predict and avoid them. The plasma lances continued to be effective until they were not. The drones began generating shields that deflected the superheated plasma. The shields looked exactly like Vrexian shields. The machines were copying the technology. Intensify fire, Quetzar ordered. Use everything. The Vrexian fleet unleashed its full arsenal. Reality-bending weapons, energy cascades, molecular disruptors. Every weapon humanity had never dreamed of creating. Every weapon the Vrexians had spent centuries perfecting. The Kazakhs absorbed it all. They learned from every attack. They adapted within minutes. By the end of the first day, they were using weapons identical to Vrexian designs. By the second day, they had improved those designs. Quetzar watched in horror as his fleet count dropped. 3,000 ships became 2,000. 2,000 became 1,000. The drones were everywhere, learning and evolving with each passing hour. He sent desperate calls for help to the Galactic Council. The avian consensus arrived first. Their fighter craft were works of art, using pure energy manipulation to create weapons and shields. For a brief moment, hope flared. The energy-based attacks confused the Kazakhs, and thousands of drones fell. Then the swarm learned. Within 6 hours, 30% of the avian fleet was destroyed. The survivors retreated in disorder. The Crystalline Collective came next. Their resonance weapons shattered drone structure at the atomic level. It worked perfectly until the drones began dampening the frequencies. The collective pulled back after losing half their ships. Species after species arrived to help. Each brought their most advanced technology. Each watched in horror as that technology became useless within hours. The Kazakhs were not just machines. They were an adaptive intelligence that consumed, learned, and evolved. On Earth, Admiral Choi Sang-min received the distress calls in his command center beneath the Pacific. He read the reports carefully, noting the patterns. Every advanced fleet was being neutralized by an enemy that learned too fast for complexity to matter. He activated the communications link to the orbital anchorage. Captain Lee Min-seo's face appeared on the screen, along with the faces of 200 other ship commanders. The captains of Earth's ancient fleet. You have all seen the reports, Admiral Choi said. The Council did not ask for our help, but their people are dying. We move in 12 hours. In orbit around Earth and Mars, the old warships began to wake up. Fusion reactors that had burned in standby mode for decades cycled up to full power. The rumble could be felt on both planets as hundreds of massive engines came to life. Weapons systems activated. 8 railguns on each dreadnought ran system checks. Their magnetic coils charging and discharging in precise sequences. Missile bays opened, revealing rows of kinetic penetrators and thermobaric warheads. Point defense cannons calibrated their firing patterns, ready to throw walls of metal into space. The ships had not moved in anger for 200 years, but they had never stopped being ready. Park Ji-woo stood in the Galactic Council chamber, watching the emergency session unfold in chaos. Species shouted over each other, demanding solutions, blaming failures, panicking as the Kazakhs advanced deeper into civilized space. She activated her personal communicator. The chamber's central display suddenly showed Earth's orbital anchorage. Every council member fell silent as they watched 200 ancient warships begin moving into formation. Earth Defense Force is deploying to assist, Park announced. Our fleet will arrive in the combat zone in 3 weeks. Quetzar's image appeared on a subsidiary screen. His scales were scorched. His command center visible behind him showed fires and emergency crews working. 3 weeks? He said, his voice hoarse. We will not survive 3 more days. Park looked at him steadily. Hold your positions, War Marshal. We are coming. An avian representative spread her damaged wings. Your primitive ships cannot help us. We have thrown everything against this enemy. Your museum pieces will be destroyed in minutes. Perhaps, Park said. But our ships were built for a different kind of war. They were built to fight an enemy that could match us in every way. They were built to endure. She sent a message to all Council species, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. All Allied fleets are ordered to evacuate the primary combat zone. Earth Defense Force will engage in 48 hours. Our weapons do not discriminate in the combat envelope. Stay clear of our firing lines. On the Time's Indomitable Will *, Captain Lee Minseo addressed her crew. They stood at their stations, men and women who had trained their entire lives on ships most of the galaxy considered obsolete. The enemy learns from advanced technology, she said. They adapt to quantum weapons and energy shields. They copy graviton disruptors and plasma lances. She smiled grimly. Good thing we do not have any of those. Lieutenant Kim Tae-yang checked his tactical displays. What do we have, Captain? Minseo looked at the weapon status board. Railguns. Missiles. Armor. Redundant systems. Simple physics turned into brutal effectiveness. We have what worked 200 years ago, she said. We have what will work today. The fleet moved toward war. The human fleet moved through space with steady precision. 200 warships traveling in formations perfected during humanity's bloodiest conflict. Each ship maintained exact distances from its neighbors, creating overlapping fields of fire that had once been necessary when fighting other humans who knew every human tactic. On the Time's Indomitable Will *, Captain Lee Min-seo gathered her senior officers in the briefing room. Holographic displays showed what little they knew about the Kazakhs. The drone swarm numbered in the millions now. Every day, it grew larger as it consumed more matter and replicated. The other species failed because the enemy learned from them, Minseo explained. The Vrexians used quantum weapons. The Kazakhs copied quantum weapons. The avians used energy manipulation. The swarm learned energy manipulation. She paused. We need to understand why this happened. Lieutenant Kim Tae-yang pulled up battle recordings. Every advanced fleet relies on complex physics, quantum entanglement, gravity manipulation, energy fields. The technology is elegant and powerful, but it has patterns. The Kazakhs learn patterns. Commander Han Soo-jin, the engineering officer, added her analysis. Their adaptation speed suggests they can analyze and replicate any technology they encounter. They probably have some kind of distributed intelligence. Each drone learns and shares that knowledge with the swarm, so they become immune to anything we use against them, another officer said. Minseo nodded. Anything complex. Anything that relies on advanced physics or computer systems. She smiled slightly. Good thing we are not complex. Activita. Good thing. Good thing. She smiled. She activated displays showing the Time's Indomitable Will's Times weapon systems. 8 railguns, each one 200 meters long. Banks of missile tubes. Hundreds of point defense cannons. Everything mechanical. Everything simple. Our main weapons are railguns, she said. We take a piece of tungsten, weighing 200 kilograms. We accelerate it to 4% of light speed, using electromagnetic coils. Then we let physics do the rest. She gestured at the tactical display. The Kazakhs can learn to predict quantum weapons or adapt shields against energy attacks, but they cannot adapt to mass and velocity. A chunk of metal moving that fast will punch through anything. Kim studied the specifications. What if they try to dodge? Then we predict where they will be and fire there, Minseo replied. Just like we did fighting other humans. Human gunners tracking human pilots. We trained for this. We are good at this. The briefing continued for hours as they refined tactics. The Kazakhs would try to hack their systems. Human ships used isolated networks with manual overrides. The swarm would try to learn human weapons. There was nothing to learn. Kinetic weapons were physics, not technology. Meanwhile, the war continued to worsen. The Kazakhs reached the inner colonies of the Vrexian Empire. Quetzar made his final stand above his homeworld, with only 200 ships remaining from his original 3,000. The planet below held 4 billion civilians who could not be evacuated in time. He watched the swarm approach. 3 million drones, each one carrying technology stolen from every species they had fought. They had shields like the Vrexians, weapons like the Avians, armor like the Crystallines. They were a nightmare made from the galaxy's own advancement. The human fleet's message reached him during his preparations. Hold your position, War Marshal. We arrive in 48 hours. Keep your ships above the planet's north pole. We will engage from the south. Quetzar wanted to refuse. His pride demanded it. But his people needed any help they could get. He moved his remaining forces, as instructed. On Earth, Ambassador Park stood in the command center with Admiral Choi. They watched the fleet's progress through the jump points. 3 weeks of travel reduced to 3 days, using the few modern jump gates Earth had installed. The ships themselves were old, but Earth had not been completely isolated from galactic infrastructure. The Council is watching, Park said quietly. They expect us to fail. They probably hope we fail, Choi replied. It would prove their superiority was justified. He studied the tactical displays. But we will not fail. These ships were designed by people who understood that war is not about elegance. It is about what works when everything else fails. The fleet practiced as they traveled. Gunnery crews ran simulations. Damage control teams rehearsed repairs. Every crew member knew their role and 3 backup roles in case something went wrong. Redundancy was built into everything, even the crew structure. Captain Lee walked through her ship during one of these drills. She passed crews, physically loading ammunition into magazines using mechanical lifts. She saw engineers testing backup systems for the backup systems. Everything was manual. Everything was simple. Everything worked. She found Kim running a targeting drill in the gunnery control center. He was training his team to hit moving targets without computer assistance. The old way. The human way. How are they performing? She asked. Better than expected, Captain, Kim replied. These systems were designed when we fought enemies who could hack our computers and jam our sensors, so our ancestors made weapons that worked with human eyes and human judgment. It is slower than AI targeting, but it cannot be hacked or jammed. Minseo watched as a gunner successfully tracked and hit a simulated target using only visual confirmation and manual calculation. The Kazakhs will not expect this. The galaxy forgot that wars were once fought with human skill instead of computer precision. The fleet continued toward the Vrexian system. As they approached, long-range sensors began picking up the scope of the battle. The Kazakh swarm had grown to 3 million drones. They filled space like a plague, consuming everything they touched. Park sent her final message to the Galactic Council. All non-human vessels are ordered to evacuate from the Vrexian homeworld system. Earth Defense Force is engaging in 6 hours. Do not enter our combat zone. Our weapons are not designed for precision. They are designed for overwhelming firepower. The avian representative sent a reply. Ambassador, we appreciate your courage, but this is suicide. The Kazakhs have adapted to every weapon we possess. They will destroy you. Seekin, perhaps, Park responded. But they have not adapted to our weapons. They have not faced them yet. The Time's indomitable will Times led the fleet into the Vrexian system. Behind her came the other dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and carriers. 200 ships, built for a war that ended 2 centuries ago. 200 ships that the galaxy had mocked as museum pieces. Captain Lee Min-seo stood on her bridge, watching the Kazakhs swarm on the main display. 3 million drones, each one deadly, each one carrying the combined technology of the galaxy's most advanced species. She took a deep breath and opened the ship-wide channel. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. We are going to show them why humanity built these ships. We are going to show them what simple and brutal means. The fleet moved into formation. A sphere of warships surrounding the planet, overlapping fields of fire, creating a net of destruction. Admiral Choi's voice came through on the command frequency, calm and certain. Weapons free. Show them why we built these ships. Captain Lee turned to her gunnery officer. Lieutenant Kim, You may fire when ready. The ancient titans prepared to speak. The Time's indomitable will times fired first. 8 railguns discharged simultaneously, their magnetic coils releasing with a sound that echoed through the ship's frame. 8 tungsten penetrators, each weighing 200 kilograms, launched toward the Kazakh swarm at 4% of light speed. The drones had seconds to detect the incoming projectiles. Their sensors, adapted from scanning dozens of advanced species, identified the threats easily. But identifying and responding were different things. The rounds hit the swarm like hammer strikes. Each penetrator carried kinetic energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon. They did not explode. They did not need to. They simply punched through everything in their path. 40,000 drones vanished in the first salvo. The rounds passed through the swarm and continued into deep space, their momentum barely affected by the targets they had destroyed. Lieutenant Kim watched his displays with satisfaction. All guns on target, Captain. Reloading. Non. Around the planet, 199 other human warships opened fire. The space between the fleet and the swarm filled with tungsten death. Thousands of rounds per minute, each one moving too fast to dodge, too simple to confuse. The Kazakh swarm intelligence processed this new threat. The weapons were kinetic, physical projectiles. The drones attempted standard defensive maneuvers, dispersing to reduce target concentration. The human guns simply spread their fire wider. On the Vrexian command ship, Ketzar watched in disbelief. The human ships were not using elegant solutions. They were not bending physics or manipulating energy. They were just throwing metal very, very fast. And it was working. The swarm tried to adapt. Drones began reinforcing their armor, adding layers of material stolen from destroyed ships. The human fleet responded by switching ammunition types, fragmenting rounds that split into thousands of pieces before impact, creating clouds of shrapnel that no armor could stop. Captain Lee observed the battle from her command chair. The swarm is trying to concentrate for a rush attack on our position. Tactical. Prepare thermobaric missiles. Kim acknowledged and relayed orders to the weapons bay. 60 missiles launched from the Time's indomitable will. Asterisk. Their courses curving toward the densest concentration of drones. These weapons were even older than the railguns, simple explosive technology that humanity had used since before they reached space. The missiles detonated in sequence, each one creating a massive pressure wave that expanded through the swarm. The Kazakhs had shields against energy weapons. They had armor against physical impacts, but thermobaric weapons simply created overwhelming force in all directions. Shields and armor meant nothing against pure pressure. Another 100,000 drones shattered and burned. The battle continued for hours. The swarm kept trying new approaches. They attempted to rush individual human ships, thinking to overwhelm them with numbers. The human point defense systems activated, creating walls of bullets that filled space. Thousands of small-caliber rounds per minute from hundreds of cannons per ship. Nothing got through. The drones tried kamikaze attacks, diving directly at human vessels. Human armor absorbed the impacts. 3 meters of composite alloy, designed to survive weapons meant to kill other humans. The drones' stolen energy weapons scorched the armor, but did not penetrate. The Time's indomitable will times shuddered as a wave of drones crashed into her port side. Damage reports flowed to the bridge. Hull breaches in sections 40 through 46. Point defense battery 3, destroyed. Armor integrity at 70%. Seal the breached sections, Minseo ordered. Rotate the ship to present fresh armor to the enemy. Continue firing. Commander Han worked frantically in engineering as damage control teams rushed to the affected areas. But the ship's design accounted for this. Every critical system had backups. Every section could be sealed and isolated. The ship was built to take punishment and keep fighting. On the gun deck, crews worked with mechanical precision. Load. Charge. Fire. Repeat. The rhythm was automatic, drilled into them through countless hours of training. Gunners tracked targets manually when computers failed. Loaders moved ammunition when mechanical lifts broke. Humans doing the work that machines usually did. Kim noticed a pattern in the swarm's movements. "Captain, they are learning our firing solutions. They are starting to predict where we aim." "Good," Mincio replied. "That means they are focusing on prediction instead of adaptation. Switch to manual targeting. Let human randomness break their predictions." The gunnery crews shifted to fully manual control. Each gunner chose their own targets, fired at their own rhythm. No pattern existed because each human thought differently. The Kazakhs' prediction systems failed because there was nothing consistent to predict. The battle raged for 16 hours without pause. Human ships rotated positions, moving damaged vessels behind the formation, while fresh ships took their place on the firing line. The formation never broke. The overlapping fields of fire never weakened. The swarm began to falter. Its adaptation protocols could not find purchase against human tactics. The weapons were too simple to reverse engineer. Kinetic energy was not technology. It was just physics. The tactical approach kept changing because human commanders made choices based on intuition and experience, rather than algorithms. The Kazakhs tried overwhelming one section of the human line. 20 battlecruisers held position as 1,000,000 drones converged on them. Their guns fired without stopping. Their point defense systems created a sphere of metal fragments that nothing could penetrate. When drones got through, the armor held. When systems failed, humans fixed them with tools and spare parts. Captain Lee watched the drone count on her tactical display. 3 million. 2.5 million. 2 million. 1.5 million. "They are breaking," Kim reported. "The swarm cohesion is degrading. We are destroying them faster than they can learn." But the cost was visible. Every human ship showed battle damage. The times. Indomitable Will's times armor was scored and cratered. 2 of her 8 railguns were offline. A quarter of her point defense systems were destroyed. But she kept fighting. Admiral Choi's voice came through the fleet channel. "All ships, the enemy is attempting to retreat from the system. Do not pursue beyond the orbital plane. Continue firing until they are gone or destroyed." The human fleet maintained formation and kept firing. Railguns. Missiles. Point defense. Simple weapons using simple physics to kill an enemy that had learned to defeat complexity. War Marshal Ketzar watched from his flagship as the tide of battle turned completely. The swarm that had consumed his empire was dying, not from advanced technology or elegant solutions, but from brutal, relentless firepower that the machines could not adapt to because there was nothing to adapt to. His communications officer reported that other species were sending observers. The Avian Consensus. The Crystalline Collective. Every council member who had mocked humanity's ancient fleet was now watching those same ships save the galaxy. After 28 hours of continuous combat, the last Kazakh's drone was destroyed. The human fleet remained in formation, guns still charged, ready to continue if needed. Captain Lee allowed herself to sit back in her chair. Her uniform was soaked with sweat. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. Around her, the bridge crew looked equally worn. "Damage report," she said quietly. Commander Han's voice was hoarse. "Armor integrity at 40%. 4 railguns offline. 30% of point defense systems destroyed. Hull breaches in 20 sections. But the ship is combat capable. All critical systems functional." Minseo nodded slowly. The Time's indomitable will times had done what she was built to do. She had endured. The human fleet held position above the Vrexian homeworld as recovery operations began. Every ship showed the scars of battle, scorched armor, destroyed weapon systems, hull breaches sealed with emergency patches. But every ship remained operational. Every ship could still fight if needed. War Marshal Ketzar requested permission to board the Time's indomitable will asterisk. Captain Lee granted it. Curious what the Vrexian commander wanted to say after mocking humanity's fleet just months ago. The shuttle docked in one of the few bays still functional. Quetzar emerged wearing dress uniform, despite his own injuries. Lee met him in the docking bay, still wearing her combat uniform stained with sweat and coolant. "War Marshal," she said formally. "Welcome aboard." Quetzar looked around the bay. Human crew members were everywhere, manually repairing systems using physical tools, welding, hammering, replacing components. "I wish to see your command center," he said. Lee led him through corridors still scarred from battle. Emergency lighting flickered in sections where main power had not been restored. The air smelled of burnt insulation and human sweat. Nothing was elegant or clean. Everything was functional. The bridge still showed active damage. One console sparked occasionally until an engineer manually disconnected it. Crew members moved between stations, physically checking systems because several computer networks were offline. "This is how you fight?" Quetzar asked quietly. "This is how we survive," Lee replied. She gestured to the weapon status board. "Our railguns are mechanical systems with electromagnetic coils. If the computers fail, we can fire them manually. If the loaders break, humans can load them by hand. Every system has backups, and those backups have backups." She pulled up historical records, showing the Third Solar War. Battles that lasted weeks in deep space, where no help would come. Ships fighting until their ammunition was gone, then ramming enemy vessels because that was all they had left. "We built these ships while fighting ourselves," Lee explained. "We designed them, knowing the enemy would have the same technology, the same intelligence, the same desperation, to win. So we made them tough and simple and reliable. We made them to last." Quetzar looked at the battle damage visible through the bridge windows. "Your weapons were effective because they were primitive." "No," Lee corrected gently. "Our weapons were effective because they were practical. Your plasma lances were beautiful. Your quantum torpedoes were marvels of physics. But when the enemy learned your physics, you had nothing left." She pulled up the battle recordings. "You tried to outthink the Kazakhs. We just hit them until they stopped moving." The War Marshal studied the tactical displays for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I mocked your fleet. I called your ships museum pieces. You were not wrong," Lee said. "These ships represent our worst historical moment. The Third Solar War killed 2 billion humans. These vessels were built to kill other humans. That is not something we are proud of. But it saved us," Quetzar said. "Yes. Our worst prepared us to protect your best." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Every species sent representatives. Every species wanted to understand how humanity's ancient fleet had succeeded where their advanced forces had failed. Ambassador Park stood before them, battle recordings playing on the central display. The council chamber was silent as they watched human ships endure punishment that would have destroyed modern vessels. Silent as they saw simple kinetic weapons tear through an enemy that had adapted to every advanced technology. "Many of you are requesting technical specifications," Park said. "Requesting permission to retrofit your ships with human armor. Requesting our weapons designs." She paused. "We will share what we can. But you must understand something important." She gestured to the recordings. "Our fleet was not designed to be advanced. It was designed to endure. Every species here built beautiful ships for a beautiful future. We built ugly ships for an ugly war we hoped would never happen again." The avian representative spoke, her voice subdued. "The galaxy owes humanity respect," the crystalline delegate added. "We were wrong to mock your contribution." Park acknowledged this with a slight nod. "We do not want to return to that philosophy. These ships represent paranoia and the certainty that someone would try to kill us. We were right about that certainty, but it came from our own history of killing each other." Admiral Choi's voice came through the channel from his command center on Earth. "The galaxy's species reached for the stars with hope and innovation. We reached for them with fear and the knowledge that survival requires ugly tools. You were right to find our ships disturbing. They should be disturbing. Over the following weeks, the human fleet remained on station above the Vrexian homeworld. Human engineers helped rebuild defensive installations. Human tactical officers trained local forces in what Admiral Choi called sustainability doctrine. Simple weapons, redundant systems, manual controls. Everything designed to work when advanced technology failed. Captain Lee found herself teaching Vrexian officers about combat when computers are compromised. How to aim guns manually. How to calculate trajectories with basic math. How to fight when elegant solutions are not available. This seems backward, one young Vrexian officer said. Learning primitive techniques, Lee smiled slightly. When your quantum targeting fails, and your AI is hacked, and your shields are down, you will be grateful for primitive techniques that still work. She showed them the Time's indomitable will's Time's damage control procedures. How human crews had sealed breaches with metal plates and welding. How they had rerouted power using manual switches when computer controls failed. How they had kept fighting through injuries and exhaustion because giving up meant death. War is not about who has the best technology, she explained. War is about who can keep fighting when everything goes wrong. These techniques kept us alive when we were fighting enemies who knew every trick we had. On the journey back to Earth, the human fleet moved slowly. Many ships needed repairs that could not be completed in space. The Time's indomitable will Times limped along at half speed, her damaged engines pushing as hard as they could. Lieutenant Kim sat with Captain Lee in the officers' mess, both of them exhausted. The galaxy will remember this battle for centuries, he said. They will remember we saved them, Lee replied. But I hope they also remember why we could save them. Not because we were strong, but because we were broken. These ships exist because humanity tore itself apart. That is not a victory. When the fleet finally reached Earth orbit, every galactic species sent messages of thanks. Diplomatic channels flooded with requests for alliances and technology sharing. The human fleet that had been mocked was now celebrated. But on the Time's indomitable will asterisk, Captain Lee stood on her battle-scarred bridge and felt no triumph. She looked at the crew members who had fought for 28 hours without rest. She saw the memorial wall where they would add the names of crew members who had died in the battle. Admiral Choi sent orders for the fleet to return to standby mode. The ships would be repaired. The weapons would be reloaded. The crews would rest and train, and the old warships would wait again, silent in orbit, ready for the next time the galaxy needed humanity's capacity for endurance. Park Ji-woo spoke to the Galactic Council one final time about the battle. We are glad we could help. We are honored to have saved so many lives, but please understand that our success came from our ability to build weapons of terrible simplicity. We hope the galaxy never needs such weapons again. 1C. Thanks for watching. While C-1 we got her 1. She looked at the assembled representatives. You built ships to explore and protect. We built ships to survive extinction. That difference matters. Remember it when you look at our fleet. The sleeping titans return to their silence. Fusion reactors cooling. Weapons secured. Crews standing down. The galaxy had earned respect for humanity's strength, but humanity had earned something more valuable. The knowledge that their darkest chapter, their worst war, their most brutal weapons, had created tools to protect a future brighter than their past. The Time's indomitable will Times floated quietly in Earth orbit, her battle damage visible to anyone who looked up at the night sky. A reminder that sometimes survival requires ugly tools, and sometimes the things that can destroy you are the same things that can save you.